This slide series is done in memory of Dr. Edward Ross Ritvo, who passed away in June of 2020 at the age of 90 years. A pioneer in autism research, he led the field in establishing that autism was neurobiologically based. A graduate of Harvard and a U.S. Army veteran, he spent his entire academic professional career at UCLA. His work included studies of diagnosis and classification, genetics and epidemiology, as well as neurobiology and psychopharmacology. He trained generations of leaders in the field and is survived by family members and many, many students. It's an honor to dedicate this series of talks to his memory with the support of Dr. Ariella Riva Ritvo Slifka and the Alan B. Slifka Foundation.
Welcome to this professional educator training series called Facilitating Social Interactions. My name is Dr. Barbara Cook. I'm from the Department of Communication Disorders at Southern Connecticut State University. In this session today, I want to provide for you a definition of social interaction, core behaviors that an individual needs to have social interaction. I'm hoping that I'll even have you think a little bit about some of the skills that we think about early in an individual's development and how they're still critical later in life, how to do something called an ecological analysis to identify the expected social behaviors in a situation so that you can teach the skills that would be expected for the student. And then I'll provide some example strategies. What do I mean by ecological analysis? So we think of social expectations as being ecologically determined. That means, from an ecology perspective, the members of a particular situation or environment have agreed upon rules for these social expectations. So as an example, from a work perspective, you might have noticed that some offices you go to, whether they be doctor, dentist, lawyer, school administrator, there'll be a level of camaraderie that can be loud and talkative, or there might be a level that's a little more subdued. That would be an example of these agreed upon hidden social expectations. They're not necessarily stated. You have to pick up on them, right? You have to pay attention to the environment to figure out what they are. Next, it's important to understand joint attention. I know this is a familiar term, and let me give you a definition that when I think about people being engaged in joint attention, they're having a simultaneous engagement that includes two or more people. It doesn't have to just be two. And they're having a shared mental focus on a single external object or event. So as you're watching this presentation right now, we could say maybe we're having some shared joint attention, provided that you are listening, that you're occasionally looking at the screen. What's really important, though, in identifying this shared joint attention, if you will, is the emotional response. So we think about that emotional response as being either the same, right? Or it could be different. But the truth is that that emotional response is going to be contingent on the ability to really have joint attention to one another in the interaction. We also have to think of reciprocity. So reciprocity is essentially thinking about what you say depends on what the communication partner's message was. So when we think of something as being reciprocal, essentially it means that your answer response was directly connected and linked to my sentence or response. As I go through this presentation, I'd like you to think about Frank. Frank is a 13-year-old who was previously very interested in making and keeping friends. He works very hard at trying to invite peers to play games during the school leisure activities, yet seems to always either be too early with his initiation, too late, so missing the opportunity, or he can't find the right words to make the initiation successful, kind of resulting in his peers being confused, or in some instances, potentially not really responding in a positive way. It has been noticed that Frank's peers may want to interact with him, but are unsure how to respond and may leave Frank out of the activities. Frank is beginning to say he does not want friends and is giving up on attempting to interact. It's really important to note that we are really confident that most individuals want friends. However, unsuccessful attempts to achieve or maintain friendships does result in a person not feeling very good about themselves, and so may avoid any future interactions. So I hope that as you listen to this presentation, you think about the ways in which you could support Frank. As I said before, social interaction is reciprocal. So it is a reciprocal response between two or more individuals. It's critical for that, the understanding that each person has a part or a role to play, and that the responses are contingent upon one another. This social interaction does not have to be a long, involved interaction. It can be a brief instance. So, for example, if I go to the grocery store and I'm starting to put my items on the conveyor belt, I'll have a brief interaction potentially with the cashier. Or maybe a more complex interaction. So that conversation I have with my adult son about college and how he's doing in college. In any event, brief or complex, we all have to rely on some intuitive ability that is part of our developmental makeup. One of those is being able to take perspective. So what does that mean? I have to be able to look at an individual and I have to think about what they're thinking about. Well, how do I do that? Well, I can look at their emotion from their facial expressions. I can listen to the words they say and how they say those words, and quickly infer what they're thinking, get a sense of their motive and intention. So let's take the example of chatting with the cashier. If I say, "Good morning," and I get a, "Hi, how are you?" I can take perspective that maybe this person wants to engage. In another situation, I might say, "Good morning," and the individual might go, "Good morning." So I can make some inferences about that response. Now, we're not always right with our perspective, but it's the initial space that we stay in to try to figure out how we're going to do that interaction. Another part of this intuitive ability is to recognize in any context or situation that we're in, what is the most important salient information that will tell us how to engage with that person. So let's go back to the cashier. So the cashier that said, "Good morning," I might also recognize that in that moment, the cashier happens to have a plastic piece of paper with the different price amounts for the vegetables and is busily trying to find out how much my avocados might cost. So I now take that salient detail in the context and maybe back up a little bit and think, oh, it's not that she's not interested in me, she's busy right now. So we blend the two together. And of course, I have to interpret the combination of modalities that people are using when they're interacting. So I have to be very observant, and I have to do this quickly, right? Because all of these events happen and leave. They don't last. You'll see this in a few videos in a few minutes. And finally, It relies on our ability to plan the interaction, to plan how we're going to initiate that interaction and how we're going to respond. So there is some level of executive functioning or organization and planning that plays a role in social interaction. Socially interacting with others is so important because it can lead to the development of the ability to engage in cooperative learning, cooperative interaction, maybe some competitive interaction. And where do we see this play out? During play and leisure, academic learning, and of course, employment. So all of the skills that we learn from the first time that we're in a preschool setting or kindergarten through all of our school years, every social interaction that we have is going to get us closer to this ability to engage in cooperative and competitive interaction. And of course, it leads to the formation of social relationships. While we all want that, one or two really good friends, we also need a group of acquaintances too that we might want to reach out to, or to have a romantic relationship. In these social relationships, in the end, help to support our community engagement. If I have some relationships with people in my community, they're going to keep tabs on me, right? They're going to invite me to social events and keep me interactive. So as I mentioned earlier, joint attention is that shared engagement, same mental focus, shared emotional response. Reciprocity is that ability to have a contingent response. So if I do something, you do something related back, or say something related back. And imitation. So all three of these are so critical to social interaction and are required for an individual to successfully engage in social interaction. So in the video that I'm about to share, you'll see a dad and his young infant daughter. And I want you to pay attention to how do they engage in eye contact? And maybe shift your thinking from eye contact to more about gaze referencing. Notice when they have a share or sharing of their emotional response. Pay attention to how both the dad has some kind of anticipation responding from the daughter, kind of some waiting happens, and she does the same to him. Notice there is a contingency in that responding, so you'll see some reciprocity, some back and forth. And lastly, one of the areas of joint attention that we think about in terms of measuring it to see how well it exists in an individual is something called the 3-point reference. And that is the individual kind of looking at that shared mental focus, whatever it might be. And I think in this case, it's a little baby bunny. And, so kind of looking at the baby bunny, looking at the dad, looking back at the baby bunny to show enjoyment. So think about those as you watch this video.
And she's a little bunny, foo, foo, I don't want to see you scooping up the field mice and bopping them on the head. Cause he's a little bunny, foo, foo, hopping through the forest, scooping up the field mice and bopping them on the head. Ah! And she's a little bunny, foo, foo, I don't want to see you scooping up the field mice and bopping them on the head. Yeah. A little bunny, foo, foo, I don't want to see you scooping up the field mice and bopping them on the head.
Now, I'm going to have you shift, and I want you to think about those same skills, joint attention and reciprocity, but now in adults. So in this video, as we did with the one before, take a look at how these individuals use eye contact to interact and connect. What is their sharing of emotion? What are they doing in this scene to reflect, having kind of a shared mental focus? Are they all thinking about the same thing? Are they thinking about each other? Are they anticipating their responses to each other and then also having a response that's contingent related to the response of the other people. And then a little toward the middle end of this clip, you will see a beautiful display of some 3-point referencing from the young adult closest to you in the video and the one farthest away.
Hello.
Good morning.
Morning, Lainey. Hi.
Good morning. Good morning, guys. All right, so we're gonna go over our daily schedules for the day. Nicholas, would you like to start first?
I have Tom in the 21st Century at 1.
Okay. AJ, what do you have going on for today?
Also at 1, I have creative writing, and then later on I have web design.
Jason?
At 1, I have animation, and at 2, I have nutrition analysis.
Okay, cool. Have any of you signed up for social activity this weekend?
I signed up for bowling.
Cool.
I'm going to the movies.
Awesome.
I'm going to movies with Jason.
Sounds like fun. Nick, maybe you want to join with that.
Maybe.
Okay. Cool.
So let's take a pause and let's think about the school, community, and employment setting. What might be the expectations for interacting socially in all of these settings? And I think it's a good opportunity to even think about what you just saw in the film of the infant and the young adults. So what would be the social expectations for joint attention, for reciprocity, for imitation at school? What are some things that happen in a classroom? How are the students expected to know where to sit, how far away to sit with each other, when to engage with each other, when to answer questions in the classroom? What happens in the hallway? Who walks next to who? When do you say hi to each other? Do people look at each other? Do they stop and talk to each other in the hallway? And so you can kind of start to think about all of these things, even for recess, for the bus, if the person's in a carpool. What are kind of some of the social expectations that are going to happen within that setting? This then continues when you look at the community. What are some expectations for engaging in the store? Is it expected to talk to strangers? Well, maybe it is, but what degree? What does that look like? How about places of worship or, kind of those county fairs that people have, hiking trails? So you can begin to see that there are complexities of the expectations in these settings. And it's important for us to know what those are if we're going to support our individuals in engaging in these settings. That's why I am a strong proponent for everyone, including anybody who works with a student, to understand what it means to do an ecological assessment. It's simple. You're essentially observing a typical situation and you're trying to figure out what are the expected behaviors. What has the group ecologically determined to be expected for that setting? So there are 3 steps. So first, you observe and document the students in the space who have not been identified as having challenges. Then you observe and document the individual who has been identified as having challenges to see how they socially interact, because you'll discover they'll have some of the expectations, but maybe not all of them. And then finally, the 3rd step is working with the team to try to make a plan. How are we going to support this student in achieving use of those socially expected behaviors in the classroom? So let's go back to Frank, and let's think about Frank in the cafeteria. So we've observed the typical individuals in his peers in the class, in the cafeteria. And what we have discovered is that there is kind of a rule for how the group socially interacts. And that rule is that they kind of saunter over to the table where their friends are. They pause and they wait for the friends at the table to give a natural cue, which is a looking up, smiling, to say, yeah, come sit with us. And then the individuals make the interaction, can I sit with you? When we watched Frank in the cafeteria, we noticed he wasn't seeing that natural cue. And he was walking up to the table. They were in midst conversation, and he was asking to sit there. They weren't responding, so he would walk away. So now we know that we have a sense of what is expected by his peers, what Frank might not be doing because maybe he's not recognizing that cue. And now we can create an intervention that hopefully can teach him that cue, which is walk up to the table and look and wait. Wait for one of your friends to look at you and smile. And then you can now go over and ask to sit with them. And that sometimes can seem unfair, but remember, we want to have our individuals have choice. And so if that's not a comfort for them, at least we've taught them what to do, we've showed them what the expectation is, and then they can make the decision to do it or not. So now I'm going to conclude with a few techniques that are in some of our other video trainings here. The first one has to do with using what we mostly refer to as a prompting hierarchy. However, I also want to share that some professionals use the term cueing instead. So in the example of Frank and initiating this interaction in the cafeteria, we would take a look at this prompting hierarchy and we could say, he already has some steps, he's just not using them quite in the expected ways that we would want. So I'm probably going to begin with a most to least prompting hierarchy. However, it might be more about giving him some priming and then in the moment being next to him and gesturing, just to remind him what he has to do, and then fading that prompting over time. Another technique could be creating visual supports that give him those rules. So you can see here in these bookmarks I've created for entering a conversation that the very first step to entering a conversation is to look at the people and to see if they're interested. And so these sets of steps could be then given to Frank. For your benefit, I've also added the exiting a conversation. So what happens when you have to leave? Do you abruptly get up and walk away? No, you wait for a pause. And when there's a pause, you quickly say, I have to go. And you might even give a reason why you have to go, and you say goodbye and walk away. Another technique to facilitate social interaction is the use of video models. So a video model is typically a live action image of other people engaging in an expected behavior. I'm going to suspect that many of you use YouTube videos for self-help, right? To learn how to do, right? So to learn how to create a canopy for your generator, right? So I'm sure you have that ability to use YouTube to learn how to do activities around the house. Well, lo and behold, video models are also a fabulous way to teach individuals how to engage in social interaction. So there are many that are available commercially. For example, there is a site called Everyday Speech Videos, has some wonderful video models, and you can create your own. So in this example of a video model, it usually is filming other people engaging in the behavior, usually in the expected way. Some will include unexpected behavior, but a word of caution. Best to show what you want the student to do rather than what you don't want them to do. There are also two other kinds of video models that people use. One is referred to as a self video model, And that is when you film the individual in a situation, and maybe you work with the individual to kind of do a dissection of how the student was in that situation. In that instance, it's very important to do that as a one-on-one, because there was definitely some exposure to revealing some mistakes, and we all make mistakes. So you don't want to have it be an embarrassing situation. Another strategy for video models is something called person point of view. Perhaps you're familiar with the camera that people put on their forehead called the Go camera, or something of that nature. That particular camera affords us the opportunity to experience life through that person. So maybe you've seen the videos that show you going down a roller coaster that maybe you would never do in real life. And actually this Go Pro, I think it's called, will give you that opportunity to experience that ride. This is another avenue that has growing potential. So having, with our individuals having difficult taking perspective, video models of other people sometimes create an awkwardness because they're not really sure who they should imitate, and they don't kind of get that front on view, they're seeing them from the side. So it's the idea that if I do point of view modeling, the individual will really experience the situation the way they would experience if they were in it. So in this video I'm about to share with you, you remember the adults in that classroom scenario. So this is a crafted, if you will, video model that uses those same adults, adding some language to support Frank attending and interacting with peers during class.
Hello.
Good morning.
Morning, lady. Hi.
Good morning, guys. Great, so we're gonna go over our daily schedules for the day. Nicholas,
I have in the 21st century at 1.
okay. What do you have going on for today?
Also at 1, I have creative writing, and then later on I have web design.
Jason?
At 1, I have animation, and at 2, I have nutrition analysis.
Okay, cool. Have any of you signed up for social activity this weekend?
I signed up for bowling.
Cool.
I'm going to the movies.
Awesome.
I'm going to the movies with Jason.
Sounds like fun. Nick, maybe you want to join with that.
Maybe.
Okay. Cool.
Lastly, we have a technique known as role play. This is a very common technique, and it's important to understand that with individuals who have difficulty with social interaction, role play is very hard for them. Part of the reason that they're seeking our support or in need of our support is that they can't role play. Isn't that what social interaction really is? So it's important that if you want to practice these social interaction situations and you want to do it through role play, it's critical to create a script. You really have to set it up like it's a play. Set up the context, create the script. Don't worry about the person not generating their own language at first, because you really want to help them to be comfortable with the situation and the environment. And certainly add visual supports, and then plan for some cueing and prompting to be part of that role play. Thank you for listening and engaging in this presentation. I'd like to share that there will be additional presentations that you can access, and we invite you to visit our website. We always welcome your engagement and your support, and contributions can be made through our website. Once again, thank you for listening